Hey there, and welcome to another Ask Me Anything session where I am answering all of your questions on the publishing industry and writing a better book. Thank you again so much for all of the wonderful questions. I'm trying to get through as many as I can. Keep them coming. I love to see it. And I hope you're finding these Q&A videos helpful. Before we dive in, I want to remind you that I have a link to download my free story self-assessment in the description. I designed this resource to help you pinpoint your story's strengths and weaknesses so that you can have a game plan for the revision process, which I know it can be really difficult to evaluate what you're doing well and what you could improve in your own story. So hopefully the resource helps you out. Also, let me know how it goes for you. It'll also sign you up to receive my newsletter that is launching soon with exclusive tips and resources. We have some great questions today. So without further ado, let's dive in. First question here. There's a very popular book for writers now called Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. It gets terrific reviews. Do agents look for those 15 beats embedded in the synopsis, and must the novel have those beats at approximately the same points in the novel that Brody says is crucial to a well-paced novel? Great question, and I'm glad you brought this up. I also am aware of the book and the novel structure that is outlined in it. And I think it is an excellent tool, especially if it resonates with you and if you can apply it to your own story. That said, my view with any of these specific writing techniques and tactics that are out there, I know there are a few different philosophies on writing a novel and different approaches you should take, is that it only works if it works for you. If it works for you, that's amazing, and you can write a terrific review and join the writing community who follows this writing process and technique and philosophy. But if you read it and it doesn't work for you, that's fine. Just keep writing. Keep doing what works for you. There is no formula for writing a perfect novel. There is no one approach. So to answer your question, no. Agents and publishers are looking for a great story that has a great pace, well-developed characters, is a satisfying arc from beginning to end. That is what they're looking for at the end of the day. If the strategies outlined in this book help you do that, that's amazing. If you do it through another methodology, or you don't have a methodology at all and you just write what comes out of your brain and it works, it works. At the end of the day, they're looking for nothing more than a well-told story. They are not subscribing to any specific methodology. Next question is, could you talk a bit more about memoirs and personal essays? Also, what difference does it make on a writer's career after publishing their first piece at a top-tier lit mag? Thank you. I love this question because I actually minored in creative nonfiction in college and specifically wrote personal essay, so it does have a very special place in my heart. I'm assuming you want to know about the publishing viability regarding memoirs and personal essays. I would say when it comes to personal essays, it is more likely that you would get those published via a literary magazine, as it sounds like you already have, versus trying to get a literary agent's representation for a collection of essays as your debut book. That might be a bit challenging just because there is less of a market for personal essay collections comparative to memoirs. However, if you are writing a full-length memoir, absolutely go forward with querying literary agents because that is something that publishers are looking for. As for how having a top-tier literary journal credential would affect your writing career, it's absolutely going to help it. You are going to mention that writing credential anytime you are reaching out to literary agents, so definitely include it in your bio and maybe even include the title of your personal essay so they can easily look it up. Also, when I worked at an agency, especially newer agents who are trying to build their client list would actively read literary journals. And if they read a piece by an author that really resonated with them, they would reach out to that author. So getting published in a literary journal is actually great for your traditional publishing path in the future, because not only does it give you a credential, but it also gives you some exposure. If a literary agent happens to read that work, they could reach out to you and potentially want to work with you. So make sure that you have an up-to-date author website where any literary agents can reach you, and or a Twitter page that agents can reach you at, because if they read your personal essay and they love it, they might want to reach out to you. So make sure that it's easy for them to do that. Also, congratulations to anyone who does have a publication in a literary magazine, that's a really awesome accomplishment. Here's another memoir-related question. My question concerns character development. In my memoir, several characters are incidental to the main story. They share center stage with the main character for a chapter or two, then disappear off the scene. How much character arc is needed for these incidental characters? So in a memoir, you are the narrator and the protagonist and the main character, right? So the person's story arc that we care about is yours at the end of the day. Of course, your interactions with other characters and other, real people in your real life are going to be what takes us on that journey. You really can't have a memoir without any other people in it. But the reader is only going to be concerned with those characters as they pertain to your journey. So of course, characters might come in and then leave the narrative. That is completely valid. There's no need for you to follow up on that character and show us, where they ended up 10 years later and now they have a wife and kids. That's not necessary. It's only necessary as it pertains to your personal journey. So if that character comes in and say, it's a transformative experience and you learn something from that person, it might make sense to mention them later on in the story, whether or not they come in physically in the scene. It's possible that you could have yourself reflect on that moment with that person if it taught you something and if it becomes relevant later on as the story develops, but you do not need to bring them into the scene physically unless that's relevant, and you do not need to follow up on where they are or what they're doing if that is not relevant to your journey either. Okay, next question here is, what is the perfect balance between exposition, description, backstory, and dialogue? Great way of laying out all the core components of a narrative. However, there isn't one size fits all. Some novels are going to be more description heavy, some are going to be more dialogue heavy. It all depends on your personal storytelling approach, as well as the right approach for the story that you're telling. If there simply isn't as many characters, as many character interactions, then your story is naturally going to have less dialogue. If your story is taking place in a fantasy or sci-fi world that you have to establish the rules for, then that is likely going to have more exposition than another narrative that takes place in our contemporary world that doesn't require as much world building. It all depends on the story that you're telling. I know that doesn't really answer your question in the way that you intended, but I hope it does free you from feeling like you have to fit a specific mold, because there is not one way to write a novel. Okay, next question here is, one of my biggest fears, especially because my first language is not English, is agents thinking my book is poorly written. I'm a really good writer in Spanish and I'm fluent in English, but I'm still not sure. How do I tell if my writing in the book is good enough? Totally understand where your concern is coming from here. You don't want the language to feel stiff when you're writing in English versus in your native language. I should say there is absolutely examples of writers who are writing in their secondary or even third language who get published. So it is not off the table for you to get published in English, even get published in English first, even though it's not your native language. As for how to tell if your writing is good enough, I think this all comes down to getting feedback. Especially in the case of English not being your first language, it may be helpful to get an editor's eye on the manuscript, especially if you can work with someone on more of a line and copy level. They will help ensure that the flow of the prose is smooth and that there's no grammatical bumps, and can help evaluate the overall quality of your prose. It is something that is frankly very difficult for you to decipher on your own, of course, because you understand what you're trying to say, but the challenge is figuring out if your meaning is coming through to the reader. So I think really the best way to determine that is to work with an editor, or potentially, if you don't have the investment, a beta reader who can give you that really specific line level feedback. Okay, last question here is, do you believe that the first page in a sci-fi novel requires immediate action, or can a setup of the ultimate conflict be grabbing enough? There's never one size fits all approach to the first page, the first chapter, the first 50 pages of any novel. So yes, it's absolutely possible that your approach to teasing the conflict could be the right approach to the first page. It is not necessary for there to be some type of physical action on the very first page of any novel. That said, what I would say though is whatever approach you take, it is critical that the reader can register the stakes of the narrative from the very beginning. Sometimes that comes through really well in an action scene, if someone's, fighting for their life. Other times that can come through really well if you are talking about even an internal conflict that the main character is facing. We still will register the emotional stakes there. It's admittedly very, very difficult to pinpoint what that ideal opening point for your novel is. So if you really prioritize conveying the emotional stakes and kickstarting the main conflict of the story, you'll be in pretty good shape. I do have another video on the best approaches for opening a novel, so I'll make sure to link that in the description as well as another resource. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted a question. I'm working through them as much as I can and hope you are finding these videos useful. As I mentioned, make sure to grab my free story self-assessment if you haven't already. And as always, hit that like button and subscribe to allow me to continue growing this wonderful community. Thank you so much for watching and happy writing.